Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the latest live episode of the Free Marketeers, the Free Market Foundation's podcast. Thank you all for being with us today, as we have a very special guest who I'm very lucky to talk to, and I'm looking forward to the discussion with him. Today, we have Cas Coovadia with us. For those of you who don't know, Cas is the CEO of Business Unity South Africa and the former managing director of the Banking Association of South Africa. Cas, good morning. Thank you for being here.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
There's so much to unpack in South Africa. I mean, I guess there's the saying that goes, may you live in interesting times, the Chinese proverb, and we definitely live in an interesting country no matter what happens. To start off with, I just wanted to get your perspective on the last year. I mean, it's obviously been very difficult for South Africans, for all businesses of all sizes, corporates, small business, entrepreneurs, spaza shops, etc. But just your take on how things are at the moment.
Well, the last year has obviously been extremely difficult, not just for South Africa, but across the globe because of COVID. And businesses of all shapes and sizes have experienced a negative impact of COVID. And our economy GDP has probably fallen by about 7.2% or so. And so it's been extremely difficult. Unemployment has gone up. Small businesses have suffered primarily, and many have closed. I think the government's rescue package, if you like, was reasonably significant, and it played some role in supporting businesses and supporting employees. But there's absolutely no doubt that the impact has been severe, and we're not through it yet. We're now beginning to see some sort of increases in infections. There's a potential third wave in some provinces. It seems the third wave has already started. We have not got the vaccines we need yet, although we're working pretty hard at that. So I think that we're not out of it yet. In the last couple of quarters, some parts of the economy have actually grown and seem to be coming out of the bottom. But I think that we need to be absolutely clear, including to the public, that we still need to be vigilant. We still need to manage the protocols and so on. And I think the last year for BUSA and I think business has also been characterized by us playing a significant role in working with social partners in managing the impact of COVID. And in the last few months, supporting government in the vaccine rollout, which we think is the most critical issue, both from a humanitarian and economic point of view for the country at the moment.
In terms of your organization's engagement with government, obviously from the outside we get comments and reports in places like the Business Day, Daily Maverick, in terms of sort of summits, engagements, that sort of thing, workshops. What has been your experience working with government through the lockdown, maybe giving them ideas in terms of priorities, where they should focus, where they shouldn't? How has that sort of relationship worked so far?
Look, through the lockdown, on particularly matters related to COVID and the regulations related to COVID through the various lockdowns, I think the relationship has been reasonably good. The relationship has been managed primarily through NEDLAC, because in the early days of COVID, NEDLAC put together a rapid response task team for COVID, on which the social partners sit. And on COVID, I think we collaborated fairly well. And we set up a mechanism to, on an ongoing basis, brief government on how the various regulations are being implemented on the ground, what issues businesses may be having with that. And through that interaction, we saw various iterations of the regulations, even during the same lockdown period. So that's been fairly good. Obviously, there have been differences. So If you look at the liquor industry, for instance, has been badly impacted on, and we continue to, in fact, engage government on that, and we trying to get government, particularly the NCCC, to share with us through NEDLAC their rationale for decisions on the liquor industry during the various levels of lockdown, so that we can understand what their thinking is and the industry can proactively prepare to manage some of these things. But by and large, I think it's been good. I think we've interacted well with government and with other social partners through an extremely difficult time.
In terms of challenges facing South Africa going forward, as you say, we're not even out of the COVID woods yet. We have over 42% unemployment, over 11 million people unemployed at the moment. I mean, very scary statistics and numbers, and sort of a powder keg, I think, in many ways, especially when you look at the number of young people who don't have work. For your organization and you personally, in terms of priorities going forward, changes to legislation, red tape, bureaucracy, anything there that you want to highlight in that context that maybe you think in the next, I don't want to sort of ask you to look at your crystal ball, but in the next 5 years, the next 10 years, that you think the top sort of 3 or 5 things that should be done in terms of legislation?
Well, one of the things we did last year is we established not another business organization, but a platform called Business for South Africa. And we established that because in the early stages of COVID, it wasn't only BUSA members who contacted us for guidance, but business broadly. And so we established a platform through which business could participate, broader business could participate. And one of the things we did there is we developed what in our view is probably the only fact-based and data-based post-COVID economic recovery strategy. And in that, we've been very clear that it's not just a question of economic recovery post-COVID. It's a question of repurposing our economy post-COVID. So it's got to be more inclusive. It's got to look at where our strengths are, where our weaknesses are. We've got to identify which sectors will ramp up after COVID with the least difficulty. They'll all be difficult, but with the least difficulty, and how we promote and concentrate on those sectors to enable them to ramp up. We did deep dives into about 50 sectors and then arrived at about 12 sectors that we feel need to be concentrated on, and be engaging government and others on that. We've also, through NEDLAC, been involved in a number of discussions with labor, with community, and with government at fairly high levels. We've got regular structures of 7 aside, 7 ministers, 7 leaders from the other sectors, and a 3 aside to knock through some of the blockages. And there we've developed an economic recovery action plan, which we gave to the president in September last year. And we identified sort of immediate deliverables, if you like, that we believe government needs to move on. Because I think what we're facing at the moment is, given COVID and given the fact that our economy was even in recession pre-COVID, as an immediate sort of step, we need to take actions that will raise confidence, that will give investors confidence to come back into the country, and that will enable some private sector investment into the economy. And we believe that the stuff government can do. Now, some of that has started to happen. So one of those was to issue an RFP for the next tranche of renewables, which has now been done. We also suggested that a team be sent into the Durban port to sort out inefficiencies there and make that more competitive and more efficient. We're suggesting that we look at some outstanding issues in mining, exploration licensing, and if we sort those out, The Minerals Council tells me that there'll be significant investment into exploration. We identified sorting out the spectrum issue, which started but now is lying in court, and they need to move quickly to resolve that. So there are some, call it low-hanging fruit, if you like, that can be done that would immediately, we believe, increase confidence, that will also release some private sector funding into the economy. And then on the back of that, we can work on some of the structural issues we need to work on in the economy. So those are the sorts of discussions we've been having, and we want to continue to pursue that.
Just a reminder to those of you watching who are with us, thank you for your time. If you have any questions for Cas, please put those in the comment section and I'll put those to him later on. This is a bit of a hot potato, so I was very keen to get your take on it, because you talked about getting investment in, getting private sector investment and growth, and indeed foreign investment would be fantastic for South Africa. The topic of land reform and expropriation without compensation, what's your take on that? Do you see that progressing well? Is there anything to you that sort of stands out, any signposts that one should keep an eye out for? I mean, that's a particular hot button issue in South Africa at the moment.
Yeah, so as BUSA, I mean, we haven't been that seized with it, because one of our members, my previous organization, Banking Association, together with the agricultural community and so on, have been sort of front-loading that for business. But I think that there are a couple of issues related to this. One, we certainly wouldn't take the view that there should be no expropriation of land under any circumstances. We believe that there are circumstances where land expropriation is necessary, but that it should be done on a willing buyer, willing seller basis. That if there are structures put in place to enable resolving disputes between a seller and government, those structures need to be transparent, they need to be efficient, and they need to make decisions quickly. We also believe that the Expropriation Act, which hasn't been signed into law yet but still being discussed, as it stands at the moment, doesn't say that there will be willy-nilly expropriation. It does put into place mechanisms to ensure that this happens properly, and we're continuing to talk to government to refine that. But I think the issue with expropriation is that government doesn't seem to be aligned on this. So the president will say that we will do this in a way that does not threaten investment, does not threaten confidence in the country. But then some ministers publicly sort of voice this in a way that creates the impression that expropriation will happen willy-nilly, and that expropriation will happen irrespective of what the consequences could be. And so the messaging needs to be absolutely clear. And the messaging has got to be that we will do this within the context of the Constitution. We've always been of the view that Section 25 of the Constitution need not be changed, that it does allow for expropriation without compensation under certain circumstances. And we continue to have that view. But the messaging has got to be that we will do this under the auspices of the Constitution. We will not threaten food security. We will not threaten investment and confidence in our country. And there are areas of that you can start with. So there's a lot of government land that could be brought to more productive use, and there's other unutilized land which may be lying, and there's no potential of any investment possibilities on that land or so, and that could be, so we could have a stratification, if you like, of type of land to be expropriated, but we also need to be absolutely clear for what and where the national interest is. So it's a complex issue, but we think that we've come a long way to engaging, and I think that we can resolve this issue provided we don't get different messaging coming from government and provided we are responsible about the way we go about it.
Another big question, I guess, is the weight of the state-owned enterprises on the fiscus. Eskom's debt, for example, I think if it hasn't yet reached 500 billion, it probably will soon. Earlier this year, I got to talk to the CEO, Andre de Ruyter, about some of the things he's trying to do internally. We've seen from the outside issues at Eskom around some of the reforms that they're trying to implement internally. What is your perspective on Eskom? And you can talk about some of the other SOEs as well. For example, South African Airways. I mean, I should start a running bet with all of my guests and ask you by when you think SA will fly, and then if it doesn't, then you donate to our Kaya Lum project or something like that. But just your take on some of the SOEs.
Yeah, so I think on Eskom, obviously there's been significant problems. I think Andre has made good progress. It's a big ship to turn around. Some hard decisions need to be made. I mean, some recommendations were made about separating the generation from other parts of the businesses. I don't think we can sort out the problem in Eskom outside of the context of of alternative forms of energy and renewables, gas, and others. I think the recent moves on own generation, 10 megawatts, we certainly talking to government about increasing that to at least 50 megawatts. And Andre has certainly been in favor of a more diversified range of energy offerings. I think we need to look at Eskom within the context and what role a restructured Eskom would play in a broader, more diversified energy market. And I think that as far as its debt is concerned, it needs to be put on a reasonably good operational footing. I think at the end of the day, some hard discussions are going to have to be had about the debt. But I think some progress has been made. There is a compact signed between the social partners on Eskom at NEDLAC, of which Eskom has been party to discussing, and that's looking at some views from social partners on what should be done, and that is ongoing. So I think Eskom is a very big elephant in the room, but I think that there are some positives, but I think the negatives we need to avoid is that the state should give the CEO and his team the opportunity and the wherewithal to manage what they need to manage and not interfere in the operations of the organization. And I think we need to all put our shoulders to the wheel to see how within the integrated energy plan, what role Eskom should be playing. State-owned enterprises generally, I think our view has been quite clear that there's absolutely no doubt that as things stand, state-owned enterprises have been inefficient and they've been a drain on the fiscus. We believe that there are some state-owned enterprises that are strategic and in the national interest, Transnet from being one of those, Eskom being another of those. And they have a critical role to play in service delivery and economic generation. But they need to be properly governed. They need to have good executives, capable executives with expertise. Government needs to recognize its governance role and should not be interfering in operations, and we need to put good boards together. And those SOEs that we identify as of strategic importance and in the national interest, we need to make sure they work properly and they are not a drain on the fiscus. Others that are not of strategic importance and do not have a role in economic generation in social delivery should either be closed, to be quite honest, or we should look at different public-private sector type of initiatives for those. And so we need to do a major cleanup of the SOEs. We need to ask some hard questions. We need to ask, and I'm not for one moment saying that the private sector knows it all, but there is expertise in the private sector to take on some of the role that SOEs that are not of strategic importance are playing at the moment, and probably do it better. And so there needs to be a discussion on SOEs. Firstly, let's agree which are the strategic ones, both from an economic and social development point of view, how we structure those, how we manage those, how we capacitate those. Secondly, let's see which of the SOEs could work through some sort of equity participation by the private sector, which injects money, capital in the first place, to avoid putting strain on the fiscus, but also bring in capacity and could deliver more effectively what the SOE is meant to deliver. Others, we're going to have to close or rationalize. And those hard discussions need to happen. I don't think they're happening as crisply as we would like them to, but that would be our view on SOE generally.
This is a bit of a meta question or point, I guess, around ideology, but a large part of the guiding ideology of the current ruling party is around the central role that the state should play in people's lives, in the economy, and that sort of thing, and that informs things like wanting to keep hold of SOEs and wanting to bring in more regulations, that kind of thing. Do you ever sort of run into that barrier, or does that sort of point come up? Is it mostly technical discussions, or does that sort of broad point? I mean, me as a philosopher, I want to talk about that stuff all the time. It's probably a good thing I'm not in NEDLAC meetings, because we'll go on about abstract things. But does that ever sort of factor in that different view of the role the state should play?
No, absolutely. So we keep on talking about a developmental state, but we don't seem to be agreeing on what a developmental state is. Okay. So, as I said, we developed an economic recovery strategy. The president announced an economic recovery strategy from government. We were of the view that the economic recovery strategy announced by government was fairly state interventionist. Okay. And there are a number of issues related to that. One, we believe state intervention doesn't actually send out a message that the critical role for economic generation, creation of jobs, innovation in the economy, and so on sits with the private sector. And the private sector should be encouraged to play that role within the constraints of appropriate regulation. It's not a laissez-faire approach, but within the context of appropriate regulation, that government needs to then identify its role within a state that whose critical role should be, one, to enable an environment for business to develop, to grow, to make it easy for businesses to grow, to ensure that businesses operate ethically and are regulated so that they do not discriminate against labor and others. I think we need, and then government needs to be able to then identify those areas that are in the ambit of government, many of the social services and social delivery ambits, and then where government and business can actually work together to deliver on a range of issues. And that's our understanding of a developmental state. We are not in favor of the state playing roles in areas that the private sector should be playing, can play in a profitable way, and can deliver services competitively, be it to the general populace, be it to its customers, be it to government itself. There are areas that should be in the ambit of government, and then there are areas where we can work together. So that's our view of the relationship. I think a part of that is also, I think, that business and labor needs to have some serious, frank conversations, because I think the way we structure ourselves, even between business and labor, in a country with, I don't know, 38% unemployment, as against a country with 10% unemployment, is very different. Our roles are very different. We're not for one moment saying that we don't look at how the economy is structured. We do need to look at how the economy is structured. There are areas of the economy that are structured in a way, and there's a whole range of historical and other reasons for that, that make it very difficult for new businesses to enter. We need to deal with that. If we're saying we need to make it easy to start businesses and grow businesses in South Africa and improve our standing on the ease of doing business index, then as business, we also need to have some introspection to ask which areas of the economy are we making it difficult for new businesses to actually come in and develop. And then on the labor side, I think discussion needs to be had is how best does labor interact with business and interact in an economy that ensures that we do not exploit labor, we do not pay exploitative wages, but also have a discussion on how do we grow this economy together, and where do the trade-offs and compromises need to be made, because that's the situation we find ourselves in. And so we are absolutely clear that the state should not be doing what business can do. It doesn't have the capacity to do that, and I'm not talking about just expertise or so, but it doesn't have the money to do that. It doesn't have the capacity to do that, and it should not be doing that. And that's part of the discussions we're having at NEDLAC on just what sort of an economy do we want to reposition post-COVID, and what the role of business, labor, and government should be. And at some point in time, I think we're going to have to have these three social partners, if you like, lock ourselves into a room for a couple of days and have these hard discussions and look at try to get onto the same page from as far as a vision for our socio-economic economy is concerned, and then also talk about where the compromises and trade-offs need to be made across the board.
I think if we look at just some of the doors that get blown off the hinges at ANC, NEC meetings, it'll be very interesting to what happens when we put the three of you in a room and lock you in there for a weekend. I look forward to watching that. Cas, just a sort of social trend question I had for you to get your perspective on. I mean, we've seen in the last few years, maybe it's been accelerated now, as you say, with government having pressure on the fiscus, and it can't do as much as it would want. And in terms of social welfare and redistribution, I mean, it's pithy, but I think it goes that wealth, before it can be redistributed and used for other things, has to be created. So you need the ingredients and the policies there for it to be created. But we've seen some communities sort of, quote unquote, taking matters into their own hands, trying to resolve water issues, energy issues, electricity, that kind of thing. Do you think that sort of thing will continue at pace? Do you see it maybe slowing down in some places? Even Johannesburg, I mean, where the FMF is, we see an increasing number of potholes and stuff like that. You have sort of gated community groups trying to resolve matters for themselves. What is your take on that particular subject?
Look, I think that sort of takes you into our municipal government, right? And at the municipal level, we have serious problems. Besides the issues about financial management and accountability, and the Auditor General's report is quite clear and quite frank about that, very frightening in some ways. But one of the impacts of that is that many municipalities are unable to deliver the services they're supposed to deliver, despite the fact that people are paying their rates and taxes. And so the movements that we see, or people taking matters into their own hands because they are not getting services from municipalities, I think are, in my own view, are healthy signs of sort of civil society regenerating itself in many ways. But I think that we need to do this. If this happens, it needs to happen in a way that does not assume that you can do this indefinitely and these sorts of movements can replace municipal governments. I don't think that's what should be framing these things. But I think that if a municipal government is not delivering services and residents come together in a peaceful way and take the view that they need to themselves improve their own conditions of living, and that they will do this in a way that is accountable, that is transparent, and with the intention of, for want of a better term, jolting the municipality or jolting government into action to ensure that municipal government is put right and begins to do what they need to do. I don't have a problem with that. It takes me back to my sort of activist days where, I was the general secretary of something called Stop. It was a civic organization in the inner city, and at that time, the local authority wasn't delivering to a whole lot of people in Hillbrow, in Joubert Park, in Berea. And we established flat committees, and those flat committees collected rates and taxes from people, put them into attorneys' trust accounts, and manage a lot of these things themselves in a very good way until the city woke up. So it needs to be transparent. We can't have corruption in these things. It needs to be accountable and so on. But I think that it's something that will happen so long as municipalities fail to deliver. But again, I think that there are some pitfalls to this. One, we need to do this in a way that's equitable. So you can't have a community that's reasonably well off doing this at the expense of a community next door that might not have that organizational capacity. So I think we need to bring communities together in this. I don't think it's a class issue or a race issue. It's a service delivery issue. And so I think if it's managed properly, I think it's going to happen. But I think it needs to be managed properly. It needs to be transparent and accountable.
I wanted to get your perspective on what's currently happening. I mean, it has been happening for a few years now, but at the Zondo Commission and, of course, state capture and corruption, is it as simple as, quote unquote, seeing people walking down the street in orange overalls and into jail, if that sort of thing? If Judge Zondo were to throw some people into jail physically, I think many South Africans would really enjoy the sight of that. But that doesn't mean that the actual corruption problems that we saw during the decade of state capture would be solved. What do you think of what's happening there, and any changes that could be made either by government, by business? I mean, we know that some businesses were obviously involved. It's not just a case that corruption only happens in the public sector kind of thing, but just your take on that matter.
Yeah, so look, obviously it's not just a question of putting people into orange overalls. I mean, the head of the NPA, Shamila Batohi, has been quite vocal on this, and she said, absolutely, we want to put people into orange overalls, but she's quite clear that they will ensure that they spend whatever time is necessary to put together watertight cases against these people, so that doesn't go to court and the case is found to be wanting and then it's dragged on and so on. And that work needs to be done. And I think what we need to do is we need to ensure that the NPA is appropriately capacitated to do that work quickly. But seeing people in orange overalls and seeing some of the senior people, be it in business or in government, who have been either accused of or there's reports on their conduct. I think seeing some of these people in the orange overalls is critically important because one, it shows that the justice system is working, and two, we are holding people accountable for their actions. And it will lift people's spirits that we're not just talking about dealing with corruption, but senior people involved in corruption on all sides are actually going to jail. So I think that is important. But that's sort of the tip of the iceberg in dealing with corruption. And so I think that we need to both in government and business ensure that we have firstly a mindset that says that we will have zero tolerance towards corruption, towards unethical practice. Secondly, I think that so we had BUSA had the Auditor General the webinar speaking to our members, and she said that business can play a critical role here in looking at ethics and corruption and so on, so that if BUSA is aware of a business or a member not conducting itself well in its relationships, procurement and other relationships with government, we should speak about it. We should call that member out. We should practice the ethics and anti-corruption we preach. On the other hand, in government, I think the president has done fairly well in moving against corruption, and there's absolutely no doubt about that. But I think that, again, government, we need to sort out systems and processes in government so that these things are picked up quickly, they are identified and dealt with. And there needs to be a receptivity in government to actually do that. Just as there must be a receptivity in the private sector to ask ourselves, how are we actually structuring, for instance, our incentive structures and so on? Do our incentive structures, particularly at executive and higher levels, promote a certain type of culture? And if it does promote a negative culture, we need to be frank enough to actually do something about that. So I think the sort of corruption is deep, it's wide, and it's sort of inculcated in many ways. And we're not just going to break it by people going to jail. We need to then say, what do we need to do at a structural level? What do we need to do at the level of people's mindsets? And this needs to be led from the top, from both business, government, and labor, actually. Labor has had its fair share of corrupt practices as well. Needs to be led at a high level. We need to be at idem on this. There needs to be a zero tolerance approach towards this. And we all need to do in our own constituencies what we need to do to call this out consistently and to put into place structures and mechanisms to ensure that we pick these things up quickly and deal with it.
Another buzzword that sort of floats around a lot, and I only call it a buzzword because everyone talks about it. And I mean, the concept itself, I think, is legitimate, but how it actually manifests is going to be interesting. And I'm talking about the fourth industrial revolution, of course, and the Internet of Things and people connecting and that sort of thing. One gets the joke, government talks about the fourth industrial revolution, but it can't even keep the lights on. So are we actually going to get this revolution? You touched on spectrum and the importance of that. The FMF did a socioeconomic impact assessment on how spectrum should be released, on the effect of releasing emergency spectrum and then sort of threatening to take it back, kind of thing, what impact that has on mobile data providers and investors and that sort of thing. Yeah, how legitimate is that conversation and that dream of this connected world, do you think?
Well, I don't know how to respond to the question of how legitimate it is. I think it's an inevitable conversation. Okay, it's not a question of whether we prepare ourselves and adjust our economy to be effective in a 4IR world. Question is how we do it. We are a small economy, but we are a globally connected economy. Many of our corporates operate effectively in other parts of the world, and we need to be proud of that. Our currency is probably the 13th or 14th most traded currency in the world. Has it both its ups and downs, but a number of our sectors are recognized as being world class, and so we're part of the global economy, and the global economy is becoming more technological and more 4IR oriented. The issue here is that how do we, within the context of our circumstances, respond to this? And I think the president has established the 4IR Commission. There's some discussion happening there. There's a lot of talk about the threat to jobs as a result of 4IR. And I think that what we should be doing is we should be asking ourselves, one, there's a medium to long-term process of skilling and reskilling our people to respond to the 4IR economy. So what we do at universities, what we do at technical colleges, needs to be driven by what the needs of a 4IR economy are, and we need to skill those sorts of people. But in the short term, let's look at where some of our competitive advantages are. So, should we be having a debate on whether we can reskill our people to become computer technicians or at the high end of what the 4IR economy would need? Or can we find, with the skills that we have currently, can we find areas of activity where we can contribute to the 4IR economy? So instead of building computers, we can build circuit boards for computers. And we can develop small businesses around that, actually, and export those. So we need to look at what, with our current skills, what competitive edges can we find to participate in that and have a positive, ensure that the 4IR economy has a positive impact on our economy in the medium to long term. We need to ask ourselves which businesses are going to be most susceptible and most best positioned to actually transition into a 4IR way of working. What skills do we need in those sectors? How do we develop those skills, and so on? And how do we then manage those sectors of our economy that might take longer or that might be seriously negatively impacted by the 4IR train, if you like? And how do we then manage that? And how do we enable those to transition into different ways of working? I mean, the COVID pandemic has shown that different ways of working are possible, can be productive, can be effective, and to a certain extent, it's sped up our discussions around 4IR and technology and modes of work and so on. So I think that those are the sorts of conversations we need to have, and we shouldn't just be looking at this negatively given where we are, given our skills and so on. We should be identifying short-term competitive edges, and then we should be talking about how we together agree on a skills path that talks directly to the 4IR economy.
A final note on which to wrap up, and I always try. It's easy for us to get, I guess, mired in the cynicism and the concerns around will we survive or not. But I think if the right ideas and policies are implemented, of course we will. We always have a choice in these things. It's not determined. I don't believe in a deterministic sort of world. But the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is something that I think is very much the sort of sign in the right direction for Africa broadly, of course, for South Africa, given how important it is to the sub-Saharan region and to the continent as a whole. Just your take from BUSA's perspective on the free trade area, whether there's receptivity to it, whether you think it will be sort of adhered to and implemented effectively.
Yeah, look, it's obviously a critical instrument, and I mean, South African businesses are significantly invested in different parts of the continent. I think we have a base of which to leverage off the free trade agreement, but I think we need to ensure that we do this in a way that, one, I think we've always encouraged businesses to behave ethically on the continent, but we also need to see how we, to begin with, work in the region and be part of regional business structures to see how we can firstly begin to integrate the region to a certain extent, and how we can ensure more coordination around regulation, around standards and so on in the region, so that we optimize regional interaction both in trade and economics and services and so on. So that as a region, we can also look at how we interact under the free trade agreement with other parts of the continent, and how we optimize the role of the region and ensure that the region itself grows. As far as South Africa is concerned, I think that there are significant opportunities. I think that, again, we need to, one, certainly as business, identify where are the areas of opportunity for South African business, how we interact with different governments and through the free trade agreement to ensure that we establish those businesses in a way that also contributes to the growth and development of the countries in which we are working. I don't think we should try to, as a continent, because we now implementing the free trade agreement, try to develop continental standards and agree on continental standards and continental structures and so on, because then we get caught up in that. I think let's manage the free trade agreement in a way that opens up opportunities for businesses, regulates those properly, allows business and trade to actually develop, and intra-African trade to develop through this. And then as that develops, look at the possibilities of standardization of certain areas, coordination of certain areas. But I think the imperative should be to give impetus to business to develop, to unblock any red tape that there might be for businesses to develop, to look at business unfriendly regulation across the continent and deal with those things, so that over the next few years we're doing more business, there's more intra-African trade, countries are developing, and then look at things like common standards and so on.
I think we very much agree on that. Let's hope that that they don't try and bite off more before they. What's the baby steps before you try to run?
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's I mean, these are political decisions that are going to have to be made.
Yeah. Well, Cas, on that note, I think we'll wrap up. Thank you very much for your time, your insights today, helping me to unpack the current state of play.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
To the viewers and listeners, thank you very much for joining us, for your time. As always, please remember, if you haven't yet to like the video, please also share it on your different social media platforms, and also subscribe to the channel. You can find all of our articles, our research at www.freemarketfoundation.com, where you can also donate to the FMF if you're able to do so. We'll talk to you again very soon with more episodes coming in the next few weeks. Until then, take care.
Cheers. Thank you very much.